We're recording the daf for Shabbos Kodesh, and we're going to start on the bottom of Yutes Amabez. The daf is Menachos daf Chaf, and the Gemara has a challenge that's raised from Rav Huna that we had said all of these things are not required, but the Gemara says Maske for Rav Huna. So Rav Huna challenges this because we had said that anything. The position of Rav. Rav has taught that anytime the Torah repeats something by Menachos, by Mincha, it's to make it requirement. So Rav Huna challenges this. Haray Melech, the Lo Tana Beikra, the pasuk doesn't say that salt is required to be. The Torah does. The Torah does not repeat the requirement of salt. But it's nevertheless required that there be salt. And how do we know that salt is required? The Tanya, because it says in the Brisa, Bris Melach, it says in the Pasuk that there should be a covenant of salt, which means Bris Melach Olam, it should be an eternal covenant of salt, Shetehei on top of Chaf Amalach, Shetehei Bris Amura B'Melach, that this teaches us that there should always be a covenant be spoken about with the salt. It means to say that there should never be a lack of salt on the sacrifices. There should never be the absence of salt. And we're going to see the position. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Shimon, who Rashi says is not arguing with Rabbi Yehuda, he's just explaining. He's not arguing Lamaisa. He's just explaining the verse differently. Rabbi Shimon says, Nemar kan bris melach olam, v'nemar la'alan bris kunas olam. It says over here in this pasuk, bris melach olam, and it says, V'yisol zaro achrav bris kunas olam, tachas asher kinelo le'okav in the parsha of Pinchas. And so we see from here, Kashem she'efshar karbanos below kahuna, just like it's impossible to have sacrifices without a kahuna. So we see that the carbon mincha requires salt. It is essential, even though it's not repeated. So Rav Yosef, Rav Ketanan Didan away. No, he says Rav holds like the Tana of our Mishnah, who says lo malach kosher, that really salt is not required. That if you didn't salt it, it would be kosher. So Abaye says if that's the case, if the Mishnah means that even without salt, it's going to be kosher, lo yatzak nami. Also, if he didn't pour the oil into the mincha, it should also mean lo yatzak klal. It should mean if he didn't pour the oil at all, it should be kosher. Why do we say that according to the Tana of our Mishnah, it means if a Kohen didn't pour it, but a non-Kohen did it? Lo yatzak Kohen elazar hachinami. But we said, no, it can't mean that. We said earlier, it can't mean that a Kohen didn't pour it. It meant that a non-Kohen poured it, it's kosher. Maybe we should say too here also, that doesn't mean that a Kohen didn't salt it. It means that a non-Kohen salted it, it would still be kosher. But you require the salt. Amar way. So Rav Yosef says back to Abaye, in the case of the oil, it can be brought outside the altar. And it would be okay. But how is a non-Kohen going to go up to the Mizbeach and put the salt on the mincha? Because that takes place on the top of the Mizbeach, as we said earlier. So since that's impossible to happen, therefore we know for sure it means it doesn't mean that a non-Kohen did it, because the non-Kohen can't do it. It must mean that it was never done. Alternatively, according to Rav, salt is required. Why? Because since it says bris, the ksiva be bris, commanded tana be kradami. It says though it's repeated, and so therefore it's required. Meaning to say, it's not that it was repeated, but that the bris tells us that it's a requirement. Meaning to say that just because it doesn't repeat it, that's not the only reason why we would think it's required. Since it says bris, we also know another reason why it's required. And Gemara says, wait 1 second, let's go back to what Rav Huna said. He said the pasuk is not repeat about the requirement for the salt to be on the mincha. The low tana bekra, is it really the case that the pasuk is not repeat the requirement of salt? It says, and your whole every mincha you shall salt with salt. So this pasuk seems to say a requirement because it says b'melach timlach, which is the double expression. So the Gemara says no. Ahumi Bailel can tell you that pasuk can't be that repetition. That pasuk is meant to teach us something else. Ilu nemar karban b'melach. If the pasuk had just said you shall salt the carbon with salt, shomei ani afilu eitzim v'dam. Meaning to say, if it had said in the pasuk the kol karban b'melach without saying the word mincha, that I would think that even the wood and the blood, if they're thrown on when they're thrown on the altar, they require salt. Afilu eitzim v'dam shenikru carbon, because they too are called a carbon, as we'll see at the end of the daf. Dalman lomar mincha, to tell us a mincha, ma mincha miyuchedes she'acherim bayin chovala, just like the mincha is unique, that it has other things that come with it that are an obligation, meaning to say a mincha requires wood for the burning of the chometz. So the mincha obligation causes the wood to be brought upon the altar. So too with everything that other items come on the altar as part of their obligation have to be offered with salt. But wood and blood do not cause other things to be brought on the altar, so therefore they don't require salt. Gemara says, well, ima mincha miyuchades shematera. So maybe the mincha is unique because it allows the shirayim to be eaten. So av kol shematir. Maybe only something that allows something to be eaten. Avidam. So in that case, the blood is a matir because it allows the meat to be eaten. So and the blood allowed the other parts of the meat to go up on the altar and the meat to be eaten. So the Gemara says, "Tamomer me'al mincha secha, v'lo me'al damcha," means take anything from a mincha, but not from your blood. Yachol tei mincha kula te'una melach. I might have thought that the entire mincha should require salt. Tamomer karban te'una melach, vein mincha kula te'una melach. The carbon, the komet, which is what's offered, requires salt, but not the rest of the mincha. I know that the komets requires salt. How do I know that the lavona also requires salt? I'll include the lavona because the lavona comes with the salt in one utensil. But what about, we already learned that lavona can be brought by itself. So how do I know that also requires salt? Lavona above the bezikin, and the lavona that's in the spoons that are placed on the table of the lechem upon him. V'aktores, and how do I know that the ketores that I might think that the ketores and a minchas kohanim, minchas kohen Mashiach, minchas nesachim, and emure chatos, emure asher, emure kochi kochim, emure kochi kalim, ve'vari olav olas ahov minayin. How do I know that they also require salt? Tam omar kol carbon chot takriv melach, to include all of these things. So from here we see that the pasuk that teaches us that the repetition, that the obligation to apply salt is not unnecessary, but it's needed to teach us the different laws relating to that mitzvah. And so therefore, since it's needed, it's not essential. So when Rav Huna says it's not repeated, it proves he was correct that it's not essential. So that it wasn't repeated, because it's only repeated if it was unnecessary. So now we analyze this. Amar Mar, Eliela Kometz. I know that Kometz requires salt. Minayel Rabba says a lavona. How do I know that the lavona also requires salt? I'll include the lavona because it comes with one utensil with the mincha. Mar says, but didn't you just say that the mincha is unique because other things are obligated to be brought with it? But that's not the case by the lavona. But lavona also requires something else. So how could you say the first brisa says, the first part of the brisa says that a mincha causes wood to be brought upon the altar, and so therefore it requires salt. That would include also the lavona and the other items listed in the brisa. But now the brisa says that the lavona is included because it shares the same vessel. So, and the other items are included because of the pasuk. So why are these other verses necessary? So the Gemara says, "Hachikamar ima carbon klau." I might think that the word carbon is a klau. Minchas prat, klau prat, ima klau mashim prat. I might think it's only mincha in midiachrini lo. That's what I might have thought, that only the mincha. Hadar amar, but then the pasuk says, "I'll call carbon chazer klau." So it gives another generality. Klau prat to klau was a general followed by a specific followed general. Yetadam el keina prat. It's only something that's similar to the prat. Ma prat mefurash shachirim ban chovala. Just like the prat is specific, that other things come as an obligation. Of course, shachirim ban chovala. Also, anything that where it comes as an obligation to it. What are the things that come as an obligation? What are the obligatory things that come alongside the mincha? What are these things? Eitzim. These are the wood. So too, afko eitzim. So too, all wood that comes, that just like the mincha is salted, so too all the wood that's brought up. Ema, I might think lavona. That also the lavona. That's also obligated. V'aisi dam the ikonesachim, and also the blood. Since there are nesachim that accompany the blood, the chasim b'hadei murin huda'an to huda asu. No, the nechasim are not accompanying the blood; they're only accompanying the murin. My time. Well, what's the reason that the nesachim are with the murim and not with the blood? Achilu shtia. It's the achila and the shtia together. Eating and the drinking come together. Adarabah, just the opposite. Kapara v'simcha. They represent. The nesachim should go with the blood because the blood is atonement, and the simcha is the nesachim. So that we should say that they're together. El lavona ba'ima b'kli echad, nesachim ein ba'im b'kli echad. Lavona comes with the mincha in a single vessel, whereas not the nesachim. About eitzim, hikli miskasher b'u mincha, just like the eitzim, just like the wood. Just like the mincha has its amount of wood. So do all the offerings of the brisa have their amount of karbanos filled with wood. The Gemara says, and the Gemara says, but I can still argue, just like the prat is the specific is explained, that other things come with it as an obligation, umateres, and it's a matir. So too, everything that comes along with it is a materis. What is this thing? The lavona which comes with the bezikin and allows the bread. But not anything else. But nothing else should require salting. So the Gemara says, from the fact that we need me'al minchasecha and not me'al damcha, that teaches us that all these other karbanos are also derived through that one aspect, that they're matirin. So now we're going to analyze this. Amar mar me'al minchasecha v'o me'al damcha, from your upon your mincha and not from on your blood. Ve'ima me'al minchasecha v'o me'al ivarecha, maybe from on your mincha but not your limbs. Maybe other offerings don't require salt. No, it's included that it's logical to assume that the other limb should have salt. Shekain ashpag tamei siman. Because why? What's the logical reason to assume that the other limb should have salt? That the limb should have salt. Other items come with it like an obligation, like a mincha. Ishim kamosa, they're both burnt on the fire. Bechutz kamosa, they're outside the sanctuary. Noser kamosa, so there's noser with it. And tuma kamosa, they can become tamei. And me'ilah kamosa, and there's me'ilah. So the Gemara says, Adara, but just the opposite. Dam havalei rabbi, isn't one more logical? Shekei matir kamosa to matir. Nivsal b'shkiyas hacham kamosa, it's disqualified if it's overnight. No, hanach nafishin. No, the cases of the Evarim and Mincha, the similarities are greater. Amar Mar, let's analyze this. Shomei ani afilu eitzim dedam. I might think that wood and the blood should require salt, shenikru carbon, because they're called a carbon. Man shamislei de amar eitzim mikri carbon. Who's the one who says that wood is called a carbon? That's the position of Rebbe. That's the position of Rebbe. But Rabbi but Rabbi does say that wood requires salt. Tanya vin eitzim. How do we know that you can make an offering of wood, shnei gezir, and 2 blocks of wood? How much wood? 2 blocks of wood. V'cheinu omer. Says in the pasuk in Nehemiah v'gorolos hipalnu al karban eitzim. Rabbi omer eitzim karban mincha. Rabbi says eitzim is a karban mincha. And utu'unin melch, and it requires salt. Utu'unin agasha, and if you bring wood as an offering, it requires agasha. V'amar Rabbi l'divrei Rabbi eitzim tu'unin kamitza. According to Rabbi, the wood even requires kamitza. V'amar Papa l'divrei Rabbi eitzim tzrichem eitzim. They even require other wood to be burnt on it. So we see from here that according to Rabbi, wood is a real carbon, and it should be salted. So how can we say that our brayso which follows Rabbi says that wood doesn't require salt? So the Gemara says sami mikan eitzim. Okay, remove wood. Wood does indeed require salting. So what does the pasuk of mincha come to exclude? And afik eitim v'al mesachim. So the Gemara says maybe put in this on. We'll pick this up, God willing. That's the next daf. This is a daf yomi for Shabbos, and we'll go over it obviously on Shabbos afternoon. Baruch Hashem to everybody. A good Shabbos. A good Shabbos.
Good job.